Hello, guys. So last time I actually was recording this stuff with audio, I was using a form of tactic where basically I would have cutouts of different types of versions of me using art. And with those different versions of me, I managed to more or less make a small version of animation. Now, what I learned about doing this technique is that it's not necessarily difficult. It's just time consuming to get all the right pieces in the right spot. Now, I could use OBS as software and kind of make myself have a thing where it just flips between two different versions. In fact, that's not very difficult. In fact, if I wanted to, for an example, I could just go like this and boom, you kind of have me talking and whenever I'm speaking it does this thing, but it's a little flickery. I don't necessarily like it as much, and honestly speaking, I would rather do something that has a little bit more finesse to it, something that would have a lot more to it than just two pictures and a simple switch. So I'm gonna try to see what happens if I record with a live video. I don't know if that would make it better or worse. And to be honest, it's one of those things that in the past I learned that people like a face to look at because it's more expressive. If I had the money, I might be able to make a VR avatar, which would be able to show expression, and people seem to like those as well. But don't really have that. So instead, I'm just talking about my world. And honestly speaking, that's always something I love to do, and I feel like I kill a lot of time doing so. This episode we're talking about race. Oh wait, that could be controversial. I'm sure we'll, it's all fantasy. Fantasy is fine, right? Right. So when we talk about race inside the world of Hekagrim, which was the main thing that we're doing right now, we have the five major races that I could think of off the top of my head. That would be Hybridian, Euros, Terrans, Nemods, Levin. Oh wait a minute, there's a sixth one, isn't there? Yes, the Moroginay. We'll get into it so I can say what's up with that. But let's start with the simple one. Hybridians are a race that is kind of interesting because it's a mixture of races. Instead of being simply put one of these races, we're actually dealing with a mixture. Think of it like if you were to use D&D terms, a half elf. It's half of a human, half an elf, right? So Hybridians are similar. Technically, in half elves, it could be other things too if the DM allows it, and the same idea comes with Hybridians. Normally, you're going to have a situation in which that's going to be a Hybridian that's mixed with a Euro. What exactly are they mixed with? Well, that would be kind of similar to what would it be? Well, Hybridians simply put are basically animal mixed with human somehow. So an elephant hybridian would exist, so would a gecko hybridian, where they're some other race, usually Euro, mixed with that specific type of animal. And these creatures exist throughout the world, but is more prominent inside the southern continent of Europe, where it seems to occur more frequently and had occurred since the Dark period, a point of history in which most history seems to have been cut off for some unknown reason to the players, a reason I know, but I don't want to just give away. It's funner for someone to try to figure it out, make theories about. That's how I've been running with my players. And to be honest, if I told everyone exactly what happened inside those periods in these videos, my players would just watch it and they'll be spoiled. I know one of my players watches this stuff, and I think it's very fun that he's trying to encourage me to do these videos, despite me feeling like sometimes it could be kind of pointless. So, Hybridians. They're fun to actually roleplay with because a lot of them have to be endearing. A lot of them had to deal with a lot of stuff because their race is often the one that is picked on the most. Inside of my world, despite where you are, slavery is a thing that can occur, and Hybridians will often be pushed into slavery for one reason or another. And if they're not slaves, they're treated like second-class citizens, or even worse at times. Inside Serip, there's actually gladiator duels, which not necessarily illegal, but the Hybridians are put into them to fight to the death for the glory of whoever was owning them at the time. And then we also have inside Europe a lot of people who just treat them as animals and beasts because in some ways they can be. You see, Inside of my world, Hybridians have several stages that have occurred. The earlier pairings that would result inside of a Hybridian baby were that kind of remind people of werewolves. They're half animal, half human in a way where it looks far more animal than human. As the RP is where it is, we've basically gone past that to a point where it's like the fourth or third generation, where the human attributes far outweigh that of an animal attribute. But those other ones do exist, either inside the tribal areas, the forest of Europu, or inside of just weird dungeons where people have taken them as slaves because they're so odd to see. Like, for an example, a local lord at one point would show off that he had several Hybridians of the older variety, so he could be like, see, I have them as well. That one I use as a work ox. This one is strong, tough, and would be able to scare away anyone who tries to mess with me. And that's how Hybridians were kind of seen. They're seen as this race of people who are oddities that could be seen, taken advantage of, and used however they want, which is horrifying if you're one of them because you're just trying to live your life. One of the players who wanted to play as a Hybridian did so as a unique way, where he was a cat Hybridian who had no real physical features that would show him as a cat Hybridian, but he had like the flexible spine and a tongue that had the hooks in it, which was a creative way of dealing with my rule with the Hybridian. Depending on the generation, you would have so many attributes. He was being like a fourth one, so he had like four attributes. It was his eyes, his spine, his tongue, and think he had like extra hair on parts of his body that we usually rule just like it just grows a little bit more and makes it a little bit more difficult. Didn't want the cat ears, which is funny to me, but it's one of those things. But yeah, Hybridians in the world were something of like that. I can go on for hours describing a specific race and talk about the history of that race in my world, and if you let me, I would go on forever. That's why making those videos with the animation stuff was not working. I actually have a version of me being a little bit more concise with everything, but because of it, it still was a little long. I had to get a lot of information out, and so it took me hours just to do one part. This segment for Hybridians took me an entire week to do, and then I got sick, and honestly, I lost all focus. That happens. But that's Hybridians. Let's start moving on to other races. We could talk about the Euros. We could talk about the Terrans. I have my fiance drawing stuff in the background for one of the other videos I'm making. I'll ask her right now. Hey, which should I talk about next? Should I talk about Euros? Should I talk about Terrans? Should I talk about Nemods?
Maybe Nemo.
Nemods? I do like myself a Nemod. Some of my favorite characters came out of the Nemods because they're very passionate. Nemods are a race of people who have red eyes, black or white hair if they're pure, but they change hair color depending on what races they mix with. Like if you're a Euro who has brown hair, you mate with a Nemod and you guys have a baby, the chances are that the baby may have the brown hair, but they will always have red eyes. Nemods having red eyes is like a core part of the race, and it seems to be very dominant as it gets passed on to whoever they have as offspring. You could be 1/60th Nemod, and that would have you red eyes. That said, their whole thing is that they are a fire-based race who have this passion inside of them. Their body heat is a little bit higher because of it, and whenever they do anything, they want the world to know that they were the ones who did it. If I am a Nemod, I am proud of my heritage. I am proud of who I am, and I want to make sure that anyone who I work with, anyone who sees me, knows that I'm doing something grand. I'm doing something great. Some of them are very happy-go-lucky, and many other ones are very strict because of this. They're a clan-based society, so like if you were from one clan, you may have a idea of what you need to be doing for your life. Let's say that you're from the Vox. The Vox are magicians, performers, people who traveled and nomadic, didn't own any territory really. Uh, but if you were from, let's say, the Virus Clan specializes in their whole deal being you are the best at what you do. If you were not the best at what you do, you should be orphaned. And that was a serious thing for some people. There were people who were disowned from clans becoming clanless, and that was a whole deal. The main characters who we may talk about and talk with in the future is the Umber clan. See, the Umber clan, which some of you may pronounce as Umbra because that is some proper pronunciation of it. I call it Umbra because I heard it once said that way when I was taking Latin classes, and I can never get it out of my head now. But the Umber clan was a secret clan that kind of worked with assassination and shadows. So we had two characters from that one. We had Kurdish Umbra and Kai Umbra, two of them great players. They worked really hard with their characters. They were with me for years. Hell, if I wanted to continue the RP, because again, it's on a slight hiatus, they would jump on it, they said. But um, Kurdish was like a warrior. He was someone who had the idea that if I'm part of this secret organization, this secretive thing, and I have to assassinate people, well, if I kill everyone who could see me, then no one sees me, right? That's my stealthy approach. And Kai Umber was more of the stealthy, I'm going to use tactics, finish them off. I'm not physically strong, so I'm going to be able to use these things to get the edge. Poisons, I can use wires, stuff like that. And it was really cool to see that dynamics. And they were part of a secret, like stealthy assassin clan, so they were taught to try to deal with that. But because of Kurdish's whole thing, he was actually trained by someone from a different clan to help him pursue his goal of becoming more of a warrior. That's because the clans have different goals, they have different like specialties, and because of it, they do different things. Then we start to move on to other um, things that they would be doing as a big scale. See, since they have different specialties, they work together inside of this whole organization, clan based meeting thing where there are a few of them who are like big deals. We have the Potestius, the Gillis, the Virus, the big three who would say if you wanted to do anything in this world, they would have to okay, and then your clan's connection means something because of it. And if you had operations, they would know about it. They would be able to make it steer for the Nemod population as a whole. But that is the current way that it was done. In the past, there was a lot more clans, a lot more chaos, some civil wars even. Hell, there's still civil wars, but not to be mentioned right now. The big one was long ago, there was a Nemod Levin war. Maybe I'm jumping gun because I'm going to talk about this in a different video. But this war defined who the Nemods and who the Levin were. The different clans that had to fight to survive inside of this environment did so with everything they could, with all the passion in their heart, and they still lost, forcing them to move from the northern Serip to, well, southern Europe. When they moved, they basically saw these new people who are on this new continent and were told, hey, if you want to live here, that's fine. You have to go to the desert. And they started living in the desert. They already lived in inside the north. Living in the south was okay. But they were greatly defeated. A lot of their clans were lost, and because of it, that's why they were able to kind of consolidate all of those other clans and form what they did. Beforehand, it was a lot more chaotic. It was harder to get control and try to get a council because there was just so many people. But after this big loss, a lot of people were lost. It was sad, but they were able to combine what they had left. They combined their passions. They managed to deal with it that way. And since we're on the topic, let's talk about Levin. Levin are like the elves in my race. They have pointed ears. They have the green eyes. Sometimes they have other colors like earthen tones or spiritual tones, and they have weird hair colors at times. Hair colors can mean royalty. For an example, green is the royal hair for Levin. It means you have descendancy of the king because they have a king, they have a pope. It's called different things, but it's the same idea. Basically, we have our religious head and our legal head, and they are trying to make this entire continent now, because they own it after the Nemods lost, into wherever they can. We have a entire continent of Serip that is now under the control, and part of their agreements is that they create laws against cutting down trees. And that's because they practice what is known as Ancestor Worship, something that will be discussed probably inside Magic a little bit better. But the idea of it is that if you die, your soul lingers on this mortal plane and acts in a way to assist other people with magic. Because magic to the Levin rules in a way where the ancestors are assisting you. It is connected to your past, and your past manages to bring it forward through the spirits around us. And our spirits inhabit things inside of this mortal plane. So if we were looking at a tree, that tree may be your uncle, may be your grandpa, may be some other ancestor of yours, or someone else's ancestor. And cutting it down means that you're going to try to sever them from our mortal plane. So they make laws against that, which is hilarious or horrifyingly dark if you think about what the Nemods did during the war between the two of them. It's what created the Great Burned Patch. Basically, there's an entire few miles of trees that were just so badly burned that that whole area was nothing but ash. If you go there now, it's so hot there that you can still feel that flame. At the very least, that's what they say. But I'm jumping ahead again. I love talking about my world, and there's so much to talk about, so it's hard to stay on track. Man, imagine editing this. That's probably why I'm switching the video right like this, because it's a lot easier to just talk about things and deal with it. I understand that's better to have a constructive means of travel, but I like this. I like being able to just talk and feel as if I'm just talking to someone else about my world. That feels nice. I like the idea of being able to have it concise, but this is fun too. If I miss anything, you guys can write in the comments and I can talk to you about it. Um, I know that any player of mine who feels like I left something out, they could put something down there. I can respond to it as well. Hell, anything you guys need, I'll respond to it. Back on topic. The Levin, those pointed-eared uh, people may be good with the northern Serep area, but oh boy, is it bad for them down south. You see, when the Nemods moved down south and they made the connections with people, some things may or may not have happened, but propaganda was still spread at one point. Levin, when they finally did make their way down south, were already badmouthed as if they were thieves, they were murderers, they were people who would never be able to live with you without causing some form of problem. And because of that, they were often mistreated pretty harshly. Nemods would definitely, they have slavery. They would take them into slavery and be like, now you are someone who has no life. Euros, they sometimes would kind of do stuff like that, but they would mostly be there in a way where they would just say, well, you're here. We don't want you here. Please go away. And that's all of them, mind you, because intermixing of the races is possible. The only ones that would not be seen would be Levin and Nemod, because Levin and Nemods don't like each other because of the wars and such. And there's a whole thing with it where if you were to try to, it's illegal in both the Nemods personal society and the Levin society. Euros though are free game. They mix with everyone. The Euros are like the humans of D&D. You could just find a variation in which that's half one, half the other, no problem. Now, some people in the RP were wondering, hey, can I be a half Nemod who maybe was born, maybe I will go with like 11 or something like that. And you theoretically could, but by doing so, ancient pacts are disturbed. If a Nemod or 11 sees your baby, they would try to kill it. That's how strong that hatred is. They straight up will murder each other if they get the chance. In a Euro society, there are some laws that make it so you can't just straight up murder someone, so they have to abide being with each other or being around each other. But that hatred can carry over, especially towards a half one, half the other, unless the person is gone, in which case, things change. And there is also personal identity. So you may disagree with whatever your teacher or your mom or your dad saying to you, and that's fine. But it's one of those things that still exists in the world. Just because you may have a bad person telling you stuff doesn't mean that you follow it, but it still means that there are people who do, you know? And it keeps the world kind of realistic if you can keep that in there because it just makes sense inside the context that we all know as human beings. We know that there are bad people in the world. We know that it's still bad, and some of us will be able to move past it. Others won't. That's 11. At least from what I could tell is what I covered as lemon. So I still have to talk about Terrans and Euros, and those guys kind of make up a good amount of people. Terrans are an ancient race of sorts. They have been around for a long time. Earthen toned skin, earthen toned hair, earthen toned eyes. They are the earth based race. If Levin are the wind based race, I'm not sure if you caught that, but yeah, it is. Nemods are the fire ones, and Terrans are earth. Euros are not water. I'll discuss that later. But Terrans, who are kind of like this earthen toned race, used to own all of Europu, and eventually a defect inside of the genetics led to the breeding of Euros. Euros technically came from Terrans. Um, the Terrans basically had these Euro offspring who were magicless, hence the name. To them, the word for magicless child was Euro. And the Euros who kept that name kind of changed it to themselves. They managed to take it and make it their own. But at first, they were basically just slaves. They were basically just people who had to work fields. They were the ones who the Terrans believed were worthless because they could only use hands and tools. They would not be able to actually use magic. But when you're unable to use magic, you start to see the world slightly differently. You see inside of this world where you can use magic to create anything with earth, where you can shoot fire from your hands, you can have the wind make tornadoes. What are you going to do when you can't do any of that? You're going to make things that can help you with daily life. You're going to do things that make it so you can do other things. Euros became known for basically inventions. First, it was just tools to help farm so that they can do their job and make it so that they don't get murdered by these Terrans who kept telling them what they have to do and how fast and how whatever else they're just useless. But eventually that led to kind of tools of assassination, potions, and such like that as well. And eventually it led to them organizing slowly but surely a grassroots movement to overthrow the Terran government by killing several generals in a few nights and having them understand or believe that there was a threat that they had to deal with within itself. And after an eternal fight, they would be able to rise back up with newfound tools, weaponry, stuff that the Terrans would never have seen, and just bring them down. Now, some may say that it sounds like a hard pressed thing to have a person who can control Earth just, crush you, have them lose to a bunch of people using knives, which, fair, but I would say the idea of surprise and the idea of using your brain over your magical capabilities would be able to be a nice story. Not only that, but if you think about it, you can see ways that a person who's using these tactics that were never used before because it wasn't needed could outweigh and outwin someone who never seen it before. And that surprise is what really pushed them forward and allowed them to do more inside of that time period. Once they pushed the Terrans into the desert, that's when the Nemods came in. Uh, so the Euros managed to push the Terrans away, got the Nemods come in, and then suddenly were like, "Hey, you guys can go into the desert. It's free." So Nemods went into the desert where the Euros are. The Terrans are. And when the Nemods were in the desert with the Terrans, they started to talk to each other. The Euros believed, they're going to just go in there. If you see any creatures, they're going to kill them. If they see any Terrans, we don't have to worry about the Terrans anymore. But instead, the Terrans talked to the Nemods and decided to go against the Euros, creating a small war between them, and that allowed the Nemods and Terrans to kind of reclaim some minor territory for the Terrans, and the Terrans became the vassals of Nemods. That's the political stuff in a brief. Let's talk about Euros. If Terrans are Earth people with earthen tones who led this whole life doing that, and Euros are the magicless Terrans, what do they look like? They're basically what I would call Japanese American type aesthetics. And while I say that, Terrans were kind of more like a Chinese aesthetic. And the idea behind that idea is that um, in history we learned that Japan is basically like the little brother of China. They learned a lot from China, and I was kind of playing off that at the time because I was studying Japanese at the time. Uh, Euro um, Euro people may have that aesthetic, and they may have some things that would be similar to that. Like they have shrine maidens who use swords, very Japanesey type of way, weep sticks and such, but other things too. Um, but the whole thing about Euros was their spirit, passion in creation and progress, which I wanted to press on. They were warriors, yes. They are known for the most martial races at times because what happens when you have no magic is you focus on other parts of you that can make you stronger. That's either your intelligence and creation or your fist and might. I mean, just makes sense. Inside of the RP, the way that it basically works out is that you have like it's all hidden because the way that it all worked out was we would just talk about things basically. We would try to make these things that make sense and we would all understand exactly how strong someone is. But some easy way to gauge that is how strong they are at magic versus how strong they are at swordplay, and usually that will help tell you what they're good at, what they're specializing in. So you could see, yes, this guy would totally win me in a fist fight, but this guy would never be able to fight me in magic, haha. Or when I use my magic, then we could become evenly matched inside this field of battle, stuff like that. Like, this is how it is. So Euros were like this inventive race with those Japanesey American type of aesthetics, with the capability of basically looking like anything and the basic capability of being able to blend with any other race. Yeah, that covers most of the races. Now we just have one more. We have the Moroginay. Well, I mentioned how Euros basically were the non-magic race. That's mostly true. 75% of Euros cannot use magic at all. 25% could. Those ones were weird because they can technically use any element when they're born. Talk about that later in Magic because I feel like that would be a better subject to what I'm talking about. But Moroginay were ice, which you could equate to water as well because it was the same idea. And yes, Moroginay, if anyone just looked it up to try to figure out what that may mean, is a Russian word for ice cream. I'm not going to explain that. I'm just going to move on. Ice people is also a name that was given to them. The players call them ice people because that is what they're known as inside of the world as a lore. Because Moroginay tried to stay secretive, and because of which the name, the actual title of Moroginay, was never really known by anyone outside of their clan, outside of their family. So because of it, everyone just says ice people, ice person, ice people. Easy. The ice people were so secretive that it was believed that their entire race was a myth. People couldn't go in the snowy areas that existed in the world because if they were to try, they would freeze to death. They would just become ice blocks, and people just assumed it was just some form of creature out there that would freeze you down. Ice people. And that's how the myth became a thing. What they actually do are, well, they're information gatherers. They are people who secretly train magical arts. They can live very long times. They have ice colored hair, basically blue to white eyes, and they have this cold expression usually because the body themselves are cold. If you killed an ice person, which is very, very difficult, they would freeze up a room just because the dead body would emit this cold air. There was actually a scientist in the world named Dr. Klein who managed to have a dead body of an ice person. He published this work, which many people mocked and said was fake. But the idea of it was he was cutting into a corpse he had found as an autopsy, and as he did so, the entire room dropped 10 degrees as he was doing it. This published work was laughed at for a time, and other people did say, well, it seemed legitimate because his evidence was something that was provable, but it was an interesting thing to just have in the side for characters to read about. Some people met him in the RP too. That was fun. Anyway, ice people don't normally mix with any race because they're supposed to be secretive. The only ones who could are a group of them who go out to explore, gather information, come back to the conclaves that exist in both continents. We have one on the western part of Europe and one on the northern part of Sarip. It's the snowy areas on the map if you saw the last video. Um, Basically, those ice people want their secrets to be kept to themselves and they want to be able to grow their knowledge base by gathering as much information as possible and storing it in what they call great libraries. In the north, that is the major hub of information. That's where all the information is eventually stored. And in the southern one, it's a newer colony that is just gathering information in the south and sending it over to the north whenever they can. In the events of the RP, rather quickly some events happen which the southern one gets a little. Well, I'm not going to spoil that. But basically, with these two conclaves, we have two different leaders. A leader of the Ice People is known as an oracle who is believed to be able to see the future. The northern one is the one with the most power because it's the main area. And his brother, who was in Ice People culture supposed to be murdered, but wasn't this time around, was moved down to the southern colony to be able to kind of have his own place to run. And it was seen as a lot more relaxed. That led to issues later on, which I was alluding to before. Ice people themselves often are also taller. I don't think I mentioned that. And they often have a lot of magical capabilities due to the intensive training. If you were to pick an ice person in my world, you would have to have survived the worst of things, and you could only really do it if you were an experienced player because of the fact that I tried to make it actively difficult because an ice person was supposed to be like an end of all ends. If we were doing D&D, it would be basically a big bad evil guy. It would be the final boss. Ice people were made to be the scary boogeyman that no one actually knows if it exists or not. That said, uh, there's a lot of things in my world that could be equated to such a statement. So it's one of those things. It's actually why I think I stopped because the power creep was getting a little bit to me. But that's for a different time. That is all the races in my world that I feel as if I need to talk about. The Hybridians, the Nemods, the Levin, the Terrans, the Euros, and the Moroginay. Next time, if I am going to continue talking about this stuff, would be magic. I want to keep talking about this stuff. This feels nice to be able to do. I just don't know if people actually care. But that's the trap I ran up in last time. I should just not care about that. I should just post things as I feel like it. As if I'm just talking to a good friend of mine, talking about my RP. This video, much less concise, much less organized than the last one because it's not going to be edited as well. In fact, I don't think I'm going to edit at all. I'm just putting this video out there because I know for a fact that if I do this, I will be able to put it out there without having to hold back. The issues that I have with putting something forward seems to be related to how long it takes me to actually make it. But this, I make it real fast. I'll be able to submit it real fast. And I will have other ones that I do that will be harder to make, that will take a little bit more time. And that's something I'm surprised about. That's the thing that she's working on right now. She's almost done with it too. And I can't wait to have that come out. Probably either tomorrow, if not today. Though right now it's 4 a.m., so I guess we'll see what happens. You guys have a wonderful time. I would love to answer any questions inside of those comments. Literally ask me anything, I'll answer it about my world. I love talking about my world. And if it's enough stuff, if it's interesting enough, I'll just make a video on it. That feels like a fun thing to do. But I do think I need to explain my magic system. So I will try to make a formal video about that in a different time. You guys have a wonderful day. Hey, do you have anything to say to like anyone who might be viewing this?
Stay tuned for the next Game of Joe video.
I think that you came in at the end there, but you know what? I like that. It was probably really bad because of the way I'm editing this right now.
I'm sorry, I'm not good at
Oh no, what you said was great. I just don't think I captured it properly.
oh.
And that's a shame.
Oh.
Yeah, you're doing great. Thank you, hon.
Mm.
Now then, goodbye.